For those of us who drove these cars as our first vehicles at a time that now seems so long ago, or for those who now own one of these models, there can't be too many pastimes as pleasurable and rewarding as that of the classic car owner. And there certainly isn't a classic car quite like a Triumph. In this programme, you can expect to see a hand-picked selection of Triumph's finest, and take a front seat as they're put through their paces. Also awaiting our attention is the rich history that lies behind each model featured today. But for the moment, let's take a brief look at where it all started for Triumph. The story begins in the year 1885, when Siegfried Brickman started to make and sell bicycles in the English city of Coventry. Brickman built his first motorcycle in 1902, but it was almost 20 years after this that he branched out into the business of motor cars. Unable to commence manufacturing in his inappropriate multi-storey bike factory, Brickman decided to buy the assets of the Dawson Car Company, which provided more suitable premises. Brickman soon produced his first ever car, the Triumph Light, with a 1.9 litre engine. However, it wasn't until the 1930s that the company officially acquired the name Triumph Motor Company. Also making his way into the limelight was a young and ambitious gentleman named Donald Healey on the trial and rally circuit. Success in an international rally or an acclaimed tournament was excellent publicity for a car manufacturer and a virtual guarantee of good sales. Triumph competed in many events during the 1930s, and earning a sporty reputation, saw how they could benefit from Healey's talents and approached him to drive the Triumph Super 7 at the Le Mans 24-hour race. This marked the beginning of a good relationship between Triumph and Healey, and by 1934 he'd become the company's experimental manager. Healey's ideas always gave way to an exceptional car. His first Triumph creation was the Dolomite, a sleek two-seater with stretched bonnet and exposed chrome exhaust. The Dolomite name went on to grace a range of successful Triumph cars. Sheffield-based business T.W. Ward later purchased the Triumph company and placed Healey firmly at the top as general manager. However, with a world war looming overhead, the Triumph Motor Company felt the pressure and sadly went into liquidation in 1939. As we now know, this was far from the end for Triumph Motors. In fact, some of its best years lay ahead. Sir John Black, owner of the Standard Motor Company, bought the bombed-out Triumph factory in 1945, and with big plans in mind, Triumph engineers got straight to work. The next changeover occurred during the early 60s, when the company was taken over by British Leyland Motors. The Triumph creations that followed the Second World War now make up a significant collection of family, touring and sports cars, and today we have the pleasure of exploring some of these unique models. Although we only have time to look at a handful of these cars, you can be sure that the classics we've lined up for you make a classic collection worthy of a top place on any Triumph fan's list. So, without further ado, let's jump into the driver's seat and get the engine started. Made in Triumph's Coventry factory, this Mark I Stag has received much care and attention since it was purchased in June 1999 for £4,000. Since then, restoration has been an ongoing affair, but this hasn't compromised anything as it's still been enjoyed to the full, clocking up a full 85,000 miles. Although mass production of the Triumph Stag began in 1970, the idea was planted several years before in 1964, when Giovanni Michelotti decided to create a car for the forthcoming Turin Motor Show. Already on good terms with Triumph, he approached engineering director Harry Webster to see if they had a surplus works vehicle that he could use as a basis. The result of Michelotti's stylish talents couldn't be more superbly displayed than in this 1972 model, one of about 3,500 to be produced in the UK that year. But it was still a few years after Michelotti's initial idea that the final model would be produced and assigned the Stag title. Originally, Harry Webster had provided Michelotti with an old Triumph 2000, hot off the racing circuit, where it had been a support vehicle for the Spitfires in Le Mans' 24-hour race. It was provided on the condition that Triumph could get first refusal if they thought they might want it for themselves. Whilst retaining the drivetrain, suspension and floor pan, Michelotti transformed the 2000 saloon model into a shorter, 4-seat, 2-door Grand Tour. Once again, Michelotti had applied his unique flair, wowing the people at Triumph so much that the new creation was taken in and reviewed for mass production. It never did grace the Michelotti stand at the 1964 Turin Motor Show. Sales release was set for 1968, but the car, originally designed as a showpiece, was not quite ready as a production vehicle, and a few alterations had to be made before the public could safely get their hands on it. One change was the incorporation of an overhead bar to provide rollover protection and a secure, rigid frame. This T-bar has become a distinctive characterising feature of the Stag. At the same time as these developments were being made, Triumph was also producing an in-house engine, the 2.5-litre V8 with fuel injection, soon enlarged to a 3-litre capacity unit. Eventually, by June 1970, the Stag, featuring Triumph's new V8 engine, was available to the British public, and exports to America began the following year. The new Stag also featured all-round independent suspension, power steering, and a 4-speed manual gearbox with optional overdrive. The Mark I Stags made for the American market were slightly different, having lower power emission control and side marker lights, with the Stag motif positioned under the rear side lamp. Holding so much promise with its sleek appearance and stylistic hallmarks, the Stag was a potential hit. However, this was not to be. The main offender was the unreliable V8 engine that had a tendency to overheat and, at worst, explode, which was usually triggered by a blocked radiator. America was most unimpressed, and the number of warranty claims soared to a great height. In 1973, just 2 years after it had appeared, Triumph saw no other option than to remove the Stag from American showrooms altogether. In total, America imported about 3,900 of the cars. Early Mark I's also had a temperature warning light, but they proved so inaccurate that they had to be discontinued. Production factories were ordered to cut back the wire from the switch so that the lights would no longer be able to operate. Triumph was working hard to overcome the various problems, and, luckily for this Stag model, a new radiator had been installed by 1972. Another improvement made at this time was a redesigned air filter box. A heat-sensitive vacuum with a control flap was installed to draw in either hot or cold air, depending on the engine's need. With some further technical and cosmetic changes, the Mark II Stag models were introduced in February 1973. Among other alterations, gauge needles that had pointed down in the Mark I model now pointed up. The front seats were adjusted for headrest fixtures, and a smaller steering wheel was fitted. A few changes were made to the engine, including a reshaped combustion chamber and a dome top added over the pistons. The manual with overdrive became standard in Mark II Stags and used a J-type overdrive as opposed to the A-type in the Mark I models. Other differences incorporated a laminated windscreen, the absence of side windows in the soft tops, and a stylistic tweaking of the interior designs. But even with such modifications, the Stag did not go on to be an outstanding marketing success, and although further minor improvements were continually made, Triumph discontinued production in June of 1977. In total, over 7 years, Triumph produced 25,877 of the Stag models. Today, the Stag evokes a much happier story and is a greatly celebrated model of the Triumph range. As we can see for ourselves, with proper care and attention, the Stag performs to a superb standard. The original maximum speed of 120 miles per hour and a 0 to 60 of 9.3 seconds could certainly give some vehicles on the road today a run for their money. Restoring a classic car is always a satisfying process, and anyone embarking on a project of their own will be pleased to know that obtaining spare parts for a Stag model shouldn't prove too problematic. Embraced by thousands of loyal devotees, the Stag has become a true Triumph classic, with a whole network of clubs at home and abroad to pursue interests and gain knowledge. Events for the Stag are held at both local and international levels, and can vary from a day of competitions and fun social activities to a weekend break on the continent. The TR2 was the forerunner of a long and successful range of TR models, and was responsible for popularising the Triumph name in America. The concept behind its creation was to make a cheap and cheerful sports car that would give rival companies a run for their money. Such aims were successfully achieved, and it's easy to see how when we take a look at this long door TR2 model made in January 1955. One of the first 1,000 to be made, this early model would have originally retailed at about £790. In 1976, however, this particular car was bought for an unbelievable bargain price of just £90. As the price may well tell you, back in 1976, this model did not resemble the gleaming, healthy specimen that we see today. Back then, as a young and enthusiastic 19-year-old, this Welsh-based Triumph collector had unknowingly taken on a 3-year restoration project. Initially, the car was purchased as a practical solution for getting a young man from A to B. Little did he know that the next few years would be a valuable learning curve that would result in his everlasting passion for the classic Triumph sports car. Just as this collector started off with a lot of hard work on his hands, so did the engineers and designers at Triumph. Sir John Black, managing director of Standard Motor Company, which took over Triumph, was motivated to create a rival sports car when Standard failed to take over the Morgan Company. This initiated the 20TS project in 1952. A tight budget restricted engineers and designers, and the 20TS prototype caused little excitement at the London Motor Show. However, Sir John Black was not perturbed, and a complete redesign was ordered. The new, improved model fashioned a more rigid, ladder-type chassis frame, longer body and bigger boot. A 4-speed gearbox and coil spring suspension were also installed. Thanks to the robust 4-cylinder engine with overhead valve, powerful enough to power a farm tractor, an impressive top speed of 100 miles per hour could be achieved. Demonstrating more speed, style and smoothness than the 20TS model, the TR2 was presented at the 1953 Geneva Motor Show. The first production TR2 rolled off the assembly line at Canley in August of that same year, during which only 250 cars were built. Owners of the early models, such as this TR2, experienced a slight problem when they found that on opening their car doors, the bottom would sometimes scrape along the curb. As a result, the early model became known as the Long Door TR2. 4,001 long door models were made in total, and in response to the problem, Triumph shortened the door skins, and the adjusted model became known as the small mouth short door car. This long door model took 3 years to restore, but upon completion, the owner decided to take it all apart and start over again. 3 years of self-teaching had opened up the exciting world of classic car restoration that's become addictive to so many people. Embarking upon a restoration project such as this, one may find that certain parts tend to be missing. TR2 restorers have found that the steering wheel, horn push and seats are common missing parts. The biggest problem that this TR2 enthusiast has encountered is rust, but as one can see, the rust hasn't won yet. How does this TR2 owner manage to keep the bodywork so vibrant and gleaming though? Expensive creams, waxes and modern equipment play no part. Think more along the lines of vinegar, water and newspaper. A simple solution of water and vinegar is made and polished over the paintwork with the newspaper. Hey presto, a good as new look is achieved, not a smudge or a smear in sight. One unique feature of owning such a machine is the absence of any keys. But who needs keys when you have a starter push button? In this day and age, some people may see this as a major disadvantage. Others would see this feature as a mark of originality and a sure sign of the timelessness of the classic TR2. Besides that, what better advantage is there than never being able to lose your car keys? To overcome any feelings of insecurity, an immobilizer device can be fitted, allowing the electrical circuit to be isolated from the starter push button. During its years in production, the TR2 attracted the budding sports car market on both sides of the Atlantic. Being successful in a number of rallies and races added to its popularity and stylish image. It executed an outright win at the 1954 RAC Rally of Great Britain, snapping up both first and second place. The TR2 proposed serious competition. Its top speed exceeded that of the MG's TF by 20 miles per hour, and with optional overdrive it could reach 108. The Road and Track magazine in America even recorded 0 to 60 miles per hour within 12.2 seconds. America was particularly impressed with this, not only fast but also economical Triumph car, and the majority were exported to US dealers. Colours in the TR2 range included black, pearl white, British racing green, birch grey, olive, and of course the most popular of all, signal red. With slight changes in style and an increased engine power, the TR2 evolved into the TR3. This was the first mass-produced sports car to offer front-wheel disc brakes as standard. Further improvements led to the creation of the TR3A and TR3B, and then in 1961, the TR4. One of 8,628 to be produced, this TR2 has lived a long and dynamic life, travelling as far as Holland. It's a fine example of the stylish model that became forerunner to a line of successful TR collectibles, and displays all the glorious features that made the TR2 such a definitive model within the sports car market. Given the name, one may think that the TR7 is a direct descendant of the model range that was inspired by the TR2. As we can see from this drop-head coupe soft top, similarities are few and far between. The first TR7s, unlike this 1980 model, did not even fashion the typical sports car drop-down top. This was not a decision made solely by the designers. As you'll see, other factors influenced how the first models were to take their shape. First though, let's explore this superbly cared for 2-litre engine TR7. In 1993, one lucky enthusiast found himself an offer that was hard to refuse.
While similar models were selling for £2,000 to £3,000, this one was bought for £1,750. 10 years later, and the restoration process continues. The headlights still remain a mystery to this collector due to the complicated wiring, and rusting has led to a new fuel tank being installed. This seems to be a weakness of the TR7, as water is able to drip into the petrol cap and rust the tank from the inside out. Nothing, though, can put this keen collector off as he continues to relish in the delight of restoring this fine classic. Enjoyed to the absolute maximum, this TR7 has clocked up a mileage of 78,000, taking regular trips across the Channel to France. A boot full of spares is always ready to hand for that unexpected emergency. As yet, however, they've never been needed. But let us now explore the concept behind the TR7 to discover how this model, with its definitive characteristics, came about. North America's avid sports car market was seen as the primary destination for the new model. With this in mind, British Leyland, parent company of Triumph at the time, took into account that new US legislation proposed to ban the use of convertible cars. Not only this, but the proposed legislation would also require minimum bumper and headlight heights, as well as bumpers that could withstand a 5-mile-per-hour crash. Harris Mann, stylist at the old Austin Morris Studios, was appointed principal TR7 designer and had to come up with something that would comply with the proposed legislation. Thus, in the January of 1975, the revolutionary wedge-like shaped sports car was born. During this year, the TR7 was available for American export only, and in May the following year it went on sale to the rest of the world. The low front, high tail characteristics truly distinguish this particular TR model. In fact, advertisers based their campaigns on the unique shape, producing slogans such as "The shape of things to come" and "Get into the shape." Very often, the car would simply be referred to as the shape. However, the wedge-like appearance was not to everybody's taste. On top of this, Triumph lovers were disappointed with the mere 4-cylinder engine and Morris Marina 4-speed gearbox. As it turned out, the proposed legislation that had influenced the TR7's design did not go through. This was not good news for the TR7, as the more traditional soft-top sports car, such as the TR6, Spitfire and MG, were still available. Triumph quickly addressed some of the criticisms by replacing the 4-speed gearbox with a Rover STI 5-speed box. Later, in 1979, the drop-top model was added. At first, it was available to American buyers only, but the following year this option was open to all. People tend to agree that the introduction of the soft-top version marked a turning point for the TR7, as it was now considered a real sports car. Despite its early problems, export sales, especially to America, did well, and overall, the TR7 became the most widely produced model of the TR range ever. The TR7 also enjoyed some success in rallying, for which Triumph fitted a twin-cam Dolomite sprint engine. For the normal road car, they decided to install a Rover V8 powered version, and this model became known as the TR8. A mere 2,497 of these models were made, available for export sale only. The new engine increased the top speed from 110 to 120 miles per hour, and it could do 0 to 60 in just 8.4 seconds. Such performance improvement enticed many TR7 owners to install the V8 engine themselves. This became a fad that's believed to have reached endemic heights. Other than the feeling of pride and pleasure of restoring and driving a classic car such as this, there are further perks to enjoy. One is the exemption of road tax, which applies to UK owners of classics made before 1973. Although this collector does not benefit from this particular bonus, he does enjoy a cheaper classic car insurance. If one opts for a limited mileage policy, then the insurance is lower still. Altogether, 3 different factories were responsible for manufacturing the TR7. Although this specimen started off life in the Speak factory at Liverpool, certain events led to its completion elsewhere. This was due to the labour strikes of the mid-1970s that affected Britain's automobile industry right across the board. Sabotage was common and, unfortunately, the Speak factory suffered quite badly, leading to its permanent closure in 1978. Production continued at Canley, and this is where today's model was finally finished. The third factory opened in Solihull, where, in October 1981, the last TR7 was made. The final model is now held at the British Motor Heritage Museum in Gaydon, Warwickshire. With its colourful history and revolutionary looks, the TR7 has accumulated a faithful following among today's Triumph fans, continually growing in popularity. This collector would certainly agree, and recommends any enthusiast to join one of the nationwide TR clubs. Many clubs publish an interesting and useful magazine, and members are always keen to offer their help and advice. In April 1959, the Triumph Herald was released for sale. Unbeknown to Triumph at this time, it would go on to have a very successful production run, spanning 12 years. This fabulous car, a 1360, was the last model type of this particular Triumph range, and displays all the advances in power and design that were eventually made into the Triumph Herald. Interestingly, the model number designation, 1360, reflects the approximate engine cubic capacity and maximum brake horsepower. Even before its evolution into the 1360 model, the Herald was still a cut above the rest, as it was the first mass-produced car in Britain to have all-round independent suspension. Here we can see the coil spring mechanism that constructs the front suspension. Another characteristic that made the Herald quite advanced for its time was its super tight turning circle, making it easy to get in and out of small spaces. The Herald was also fairly light to handle, a bonus in the days before power steering. Harry Webster was the mastermind behind the design of the Herald, However, unable to find a supply of solid unit construction body shells, Triumph had to think of an alternative. The option was to use separate body panels bolted and welded onto a separate chassis. Once the decision to do this had been made, Italian stylist Giovanni Michelotti was called in to complete the design. Although slightly old-fashioned, the separate frame construction has its advantages, as it's possible to lift the whole front section just by unclipping 2 hinges on the wings. The very accessible engine makes it easy to carry out maintenance and repair work, something the owner of this classic car knows an awful lot about. When it was bought in May 1996, a lot of restoration work was needed, and back then the owner described it as a rust bucket. Today, we see a very different picture. In particular, the owner had to invest in new carpets, rubbers and upholstery. This model was off the road for almost 8 years after being sold for just £400. But as you can see, the time and effort spent on restoration has been well worth it. Triumph made full use of the separate body and chassis construction. Not only did this type of structure make for cheap and easy assembly in the factory, it was also very convenient for producing a whole range of Herald derivatives. The first Herald model was the coupe, soon joined by the more spacious saloon, and in March 1960 the convertible followed. Engines of the coupe and convertible were fitted with twin carburetors as standard, as this 1360 also displays, and later this became an option for the saloon. The 4-cylinder engine of this model with 1296cc is far larger and more powerful than that of the earlier engines. These only had a cubic capacity of 948 and were discontinued in 1964. Triumph didn't make a straightforward leap from the first Herald car to the more developed version like this 1360. The popular 1200 series and the less successful Herald S were both launched in 1961, followed by the 1250 Saloon in 1963. Sturdier frames, larger engines and stylistic revisions meant that bigger and better packages were offered each time. The ongoing improvements were spurred along by the competition that was ever looming, each car manufacturer striving to dominate the market. As we now sit back to experience the driving performance of this Triumph Herald, we can also take the time to explore the earlier models that paved the way for the more advanced 1360. Not only offering the Herald 1200 series in saloon, coupe and convertible versions, Triumph also introduced an estate car and courier van. Unfortunately, due to disappointing sales, the coupe model was soon dropped, becoming one of the rarest cars of the Herald range. But the 1200 series has a lot to be credited for. When launched in 1961, its 1100 47cc engine was thought to be an ideal choice for the Amphi car. Thoughts were soon turned into action, and in 1962, the first Amphi car to swim the British Channel contained the Herald 1200 engine. We must also consider the classic Vitesse, a close relation of the Herald family, often thought of as a more upmarket version. Launched in 1962, the Vitesse incorporated the sturdy frame of the Herald 1200 and a newly styled front section with a 6-cylinder engine shoehorned into place. In fact, the bonnet and front grille of this 1360 were designed in line with that of the Vitesse. The Triumph Herald also paved the way for some of the other all-time classics, such as the GT6 and Spitfire sports cars. The next step up from the 1200 was the 1250 Saloon. It beat the 0 to 60 miles per hour record of the 1200 series by 3 seconds, although this was soon left behind with the introduction of the 1360 in 1967. Production of the 1360 went on to replace that of all other Herald derivatives until 1971, when it was discontinued. With its unique character and practicalities, the Triumph Herald is highly regarded among today's classic car enthusiasts. Availability of spares is generally good, but obtaining original parts can be more difficult, with some panel work and early trim appearing to be the most problematic. Club support for the Herald is excellent. The Triumph Sport 6 Club, based in Leicester, is a good one for any Triumph lover, but one of its primary aims is to promote the preservation of the Herald chassis. For what was once worth £400, this Triumph Herald is now valued between £2,000 and £3,000. Since it was made in 1969, it has been well cared for and well used, doing over 74,000 miles. This Herald owner would recommend any collector to visit one of the countrywide shows that cater for the Herald enthusiast. People may automatically think of the famous World War II fighter aircraft at the mention of the Spitfire, but the Triumph fanatics amongst you will probably be thinking more along the lines of the all-time classic Triumph car. The exact details of how Triumph adopted the famous name have been lost in the realms of history, although it's thought that it could have been something to do with the company's role in producing Spitfire aircraft parts during the war. Unbelievably, when the owner of this now very fine-looking Spitfire made his investment, he paid just £500. Today though, after a gruelling restoration project, it's now worth 9 times as much, being valued at £4,500. Built in 1974, this Mark V model makes up the collection of last-generation Spitfires that Triumph produced. The 5th generation models were looked upon as the most definitive Spitfire variant and were a mean contender for its ultimate rival, the MG Midget. The first model of this series was the Spitfire 4, although this isn't to be confused with the later Mark IV model. The number 4 in the original Spitfire's title simply refers to the amount of cylinders in the engine. Due to disruptions such as the company's near bankruptcy and the takeover by Leyland Motors, it was a close call as to whether the Spitfire would be produced at all. Designer Giovanni Michelotti was forced to abandon the original project named the Bomb, and it was only after a Leyland executive had inquired about what was beneath an old dust sheet in a corner of the workshop that the venture was able to continue. The first Spitfire was launched in 1962 at the London Motor Show and was an immediate success. It was also the perfect contender for Triumph's main competition at the time, the Austin Healey Sprite, and although the Spitfire was a little more expensive, the public was completely won over. The model was based on an old shortened Herald chassis frame and allowed for a much lower, sporty feel. Unlike the Herald, the Spitfire's body panels were welded firmly together and attached to the frame, although the useful hinged bonnet, a popular feature of the Herald, remained in the design. It was a surefire hit in America, selling over 6,000 models during 1963. Just 2 years later, and over 9,000 had been sold in 1 year. For a compact, value-for-money 1960s sports car, the top speed of 92 miles per hour was something to be proud of. The 1965 Mark II Spitfire model was introduced as a response to the improved Austin Healey Sprite and MG Midget, and once again it was an outright success. With a more powerful Herald-derived 1147cc engine, additional door trims and optional wire wheels and heating, more than 37,000 Mark II models rolled off the assembly line. A revised front grille and new badges were the most significant distinguishing features of this model. The greatly improved Mark III Spitfire began production in 1967. It had a larger 15-inch steering wheel, wood veneer dashboard, and to comply with new American safety legislation, this model also featured a raised front bumper. The most significant change, though, was probably the upgraded 1296cc engine. Staggeringly, over 65,000 Mark IIIs were produced, including the 100,000th Spitfire model ever to be made. The Mark III also came with a new and improved folding top, which was previously more of a build-it-yourself roof to be stowed away in the boot. The new roof was more or less permanently attached to the car. For the introduction of the fourth generation model, Michelotti basically performed an all-over body rework, producing a much more modern design. The wheel arches became slightly flared, the front less fussy in detail, and the windscreen dimensions increased upwards. The 12 bolts that had previously secured the welded body pieces were no longer needed, as the frame became integrated into the scuttle construction. The shape of the car was enhanced further still by replacing the two small bumpers on the rear corners with an all-in-one larger bumper. Stylists made further improvements to the roof, adding plastic mouldings for increased head protection. They also came up with a new hardtop version that offered a much flatter effect. By the end of its production run in 1974, the Mark IV Spitfire had become slightly underpowered. Although the 1493cc engine had been introduced onto the US market during the Mark IV series, emission regulations meant that the engine power was not given the room to reach its full potential. With a review of the situation, Triumph introduced the 5th generation series, the Spitfire 1500, which gave other markets around the world the option of the larger motor. Now mated to a Marina gearbox, the new engine could produce 71 brake horsepower, and for the first time in the Spitfire's history, the car could reach a top speed of 100 miles per hour. Thanks to an improved torque, the car also gives a far more flexible drive. Over the following years, Triumph was particularly keen to keep up with the fashion of the times. In 1976, the company decided to reduce the flashes of metal and chrome by replacing the stainless steel windscreen wipers, along with the chromed door handles and mirrors, with a less conspicuous matte black furnishing. Further amendments the following year included the introduction of TR7 column stalks, and seat furnishings were kitted out in a cloth vinyl material. After 18 long years of production, British Leyland felt that the Spitfire could no longer contend with the increasingly competitive market. Also falling victim to the constraints of American safety and emissions legislation, the future of the Spitfire could sadly not be secured. The last Spitfire, an Inca Yellow 1500, rolled off Canley's assembly line in August 1980 and is now on display at the British Motor Heritage Museum in Gaydon.
Regrettably, it's time to say farewell to these classic cars, but Triumph continued to deliver style and quality to the international car market for many years. In 1981, the company embarked on a joint venture with Japanese company Honda and produced the Acclaim. The Acclaim was sold in 3 different models: the HL, HLS and Automatic, manufactured with a 4-cylinder engine delivering 70 brake horsepower. Lasting a total production run of 3 years, the Acclaim was the last ever model to wear the Triumph badge. To recap on some of Triumph's most distinguishing features, such as the unbeatable Spitfire, the notorious V8 engine, not to mention Michelotti's stylish curves and angles, defined just a few of the factors that made the Triumph name so famous and well celebrated. With today's thriving market of classic car collectors, Triumph has truly come into its glory and is a popular choice among thousands. There's still a whole range of fabulous Triumph cars out there waiting to be explored, including the Mayflower, Southern Cross, Roadster and the TR8 Special that was made for the 1981 Le Mans 24-hour race. There's also the oldest surviving Triumph, the 1923 1020, of which there's only one known example left. But having only had time to explore a handful of Triumph's finest cars, this may have left some of you wanting a little bit extra. So for anyone wanting to get even more upfront and personal, why not make it over to the Gaydon Motor Heritage Centre or a specialised Triumph event? Google will more than likely find one taking place close to your area. Perhaps join a club, or if you haven't done so already, why not invest in one of these beauties for yourself? Remember, buying a classic Triumph, or any classic car for that matter, doesn't have to break the bank, as there's always a bargain to be found. There's also some huge benefits from owning a classic car. For one, you can make use of the excellent valued insurance policies on offer for classic models, not to mention the free road tax for British-based owners for cars over a certain age. Collecting, or simply being an enthusiast, can also be a very sociable pastime, and reusing a car that might have otherwise been sent to a scrap heap is an excellent bonus for the environment too. So, if you're looking for a little encouragement to justify an investment in a Triumph, or simply wishing to relish in the world of this renowned marque, for the best part of an hour, you can feel assured you've been given an access all areas tour of some of the most distinguished models. I've owned half a dozen Triumphs in my life. I specifically remember the Herald as being a great car to work on and learn. Spitfires were a joy, and I still yearn to own a really old one. One day.